What's up everyone? Today we're going to take a look at the Marvel Legends X-Force 3-pack of Rictor Domino as well as Cannonball. So here's a quick look at the box. Up front we have the X-Force logo. There's also an X logo at the top of the box. And down to the bottom we have some product information on the right side. Moving down to the side of the box, there's comic artwork of Rictor, Domino as well as Cannonball. Moving on to the back of the box, that same consistent X-Force logo branding on the right side, as well as the larger artwork of those three characters from the comics. No character descriptions this time, and if you observe the backdrop, you will notice that it's all grayed out comic artwork of the other X-Force characters like Cable and Boomer. And down to the bottom of the box we have product information again. Finally, on that last side of the box is the same comic artwork as the previous side. And before we go ahead and open this box set, I just want to point out a couple of things. It's pretty clear over here that the X logo on Rictor's chest is misaligned. I just hope it's just the way the figure is packed in the box. And we'll have a closer look later on. Moving on to Domino. Her headset seems a bit squished in that plastic tray. So definitely gonna try to put it back into shape once we get her out of the box. So now, let's go ahead and open this box. Over here on the plastic tray, Rictor comes with two interchangeable flat hands, as well as two green effect parts. For Domino, she comes with two weapons, as well as two interchangeable fists. For Cannonball, we have an alternate hit, as well as the blast effect. Taking a look at Rictor's accessories first, and we have his two spare hands. These are cast in the green plastic with flash tone paint for the fingers. The paint is applied really sharp and neat, so we get a really good look and feel of those finger gloves. And of course those flat hands pop on easily. You can get him into a good pose channeling his powers. He also comes with two identical effect parts. These are cast in the green translucent plastic, and we've seen these effects before on a couple of characters like Havoc, Polaris, Magneto, and Wonder Man. These effect parts do catch the light quite well. These effect parts slide on well onto his arms, and he definitely looks the part channeling his vibration shock powers. And in case you're wondering, it's also possible to put his hands together, just like his iconic power pose from the comics, and the effect part is soft and flexible enough to be squeezed on top of both of his hands. The effect part actually looks kinda small in this pose, but it's still a great option. And before we have a closer look at his sculpt, I just wanted to address the elephant in the room. The X symbol on his torso is perfectly fine. Somehow in packaging, he's kind of packaged with his back arced backwards, and therefore that X symbol looks kind of weird. But once you get him into his neutral torso position, that X symbol is actually applied just fine. So don't be scared away by that misaligned X logo in the package. Hasbro should have thought of a way to package him properly. In terms of sculpt, Rictor is on the slightly bigger, medium-built body. This body is also being used on Wonder Man as well as the classic Punisher. We don't see this body used too often, but I think it's a good fit for Rictor over here. It's also hard to realize that he's actually on a reused body, simply because he's got many new design elements to him. The new sculpted parts are of course his head sculpt, those shoulder pads, the frills on his sleeves, fingerless gloves, his belt, as well as the knee pads and the boots on his lower legs. Those new parts really add so much character to this figure, and he really looks unique, bringing out his really eye-catching character design from the 90s comics. Having a look at his head sculpt, he's got a determined heroic expression on his face. Slight narrowing of his brows over here. Paint is really sharply applied for his eyebrows as well as his eyes. He's also really got sharp features for his nose, his cheekbones, as well as his chin. His hairpiece is sculpted, swept to one side, just like in the comics. That hairpiece is sculpted with nice textures, so you can see how the hair is kind of swept aside. This whole hairpiece is also cast in a brown plastic. His head sculpt actually doesn't come with that headband as he's depicted on this comic artwork over here on the back of the box. But he's also depicted without the headband in a lot of the comic art, so I can look past that. He's got a unique chest piece on his torso. It's got 2 shoulder pads on each side cast in a metallic looking plastic, and then it's also given a hit of green paint for the scarf in the middle. Nice sculpting for the scarf with the folds in the fabric as well. This green paint also matches the green on the plastics that are used on other parts of his outfit. This chest piece is actually sitting around his neck, and you can see over here you can actually slide and pop it off. The rest of his torso is cast in a dark grey plastic, also having that really sharply applied red X logo. That logo is also applied into that ab crunch joint, and despite having all that paint that goes into that joint, it doesn't actually help make that X logo look any better when he's moving around his ab crunch. Onto his waist, he's got a green belt, silver paint for that buckle in the middle, nicely sculpted and defined pouches. You can see those straps and flaps down the sides. Onto his arm, the shoulder joint is cast in a blue plastic for his blue sleeves, and there's also a green plastic attachment over here for the frills on his sleeves. A minor annoyance for me is how they slide down sometimes, exposing the flesh tone plastic that's for the rest of his arms. And this kind of breaks up that illusion of him having some interesting sleeves. Onto his forearm, the cuffs of his finger gloves are also a separate piece, and these just simply slide onto his lower forearm. Onto the back of the figure is just a plain grey plastic. Once again, you also see some interesting sculpted details for the pouches on his belt. And coming down to his legs, I like the blue paint applications over here for the crisscross design. This is definitely something that comes right up from the comics. And onto his lower legs, it's all grey plastic over here. There's a floating knee pad that just slides over his knee joint. And onto his boots, they've got nice sculpting to show the wrinkles in the leather. And it really adds a contrasting texture to his legs, making his legs look interesting despite the lack of paint applications on those lower legs. And onto his feet, he's got a couple of spikes sculpted on the top of his shoe. This spiked element is also painted in silver. So once again, zooming out and looking at the entire figure, all the mixed use of colored paints as well as plastics really make him stand out so much. Onto his articulation, his head is on a ball hinge, so you can get him to turn sideways. He can't actually go all the way around because that's hindered by the sculpt of his long flowing hair. You can get a little bit of sideways tilt. He looks down that much. Once again, also slightly hindered by that scarf on the front, and he can look up just that much. Also hindered by that hair sculpt. Swivel hinge at the shoulders so you can swing his arms forward as well as backward. But I have to say that the swivel over here just feels a little gummy. The hinge also lets you get his arm out that far. Not really hindered because that shoulder piece is quite soft and flexible. He's got an upper bicep swivel for 360. And now I realize that really large plastic flash over here for this piece on his sleeve. But no big deal, I can probably cut it off later on. Double hinge at the elbows that get you well past 90 degrees. That's essential for Rictor, who channels his powers from his hands. Swivel hinge at the wrist so it goes 360 as well as articulating in and out. A small downside of this mold is that he doesn't actually have butterfly joints, which would actually help him get his arms together much easier in order for him to channel his vibration shock powers. He's got a mid-torso ab crunch, so he crunches forward that much, as well as backward. Swivel at the waist that's well disguised by that belt, so you can spin him 360. Ball joints at the hips, so he gets out just that little bit, and you can get him forward and backward that much. Upper thigh swivel so you can spin his leg 360. Double hinge at the knees that's well disguised by that floating knee pad so you get just past 90 degrees. No calf swivel, but he does have ankle tilt upwards as well as downwards. And finally ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. Rictor is on Marvel Legends standard articulation, so you should be able to get him into many fun poses, including ones of him channeling his vibration shock powers. For this video, I'll be keeping the size comparisons to the end, and we'll have a look at Domino after this. And now we're having a look at Domino's accessories. She does come with 2 guns, one larger rifle as well as a smaller blaster pistol. These weapons are cast in a black plastic, paint applications for silver on the top of both of them. These weapons come with nice tech detail down the sides, clean lines to show their sleek design, as well as other elements like the triggers and pistol grips. And of course, Domino must come with trigger hands, so she holds both her guns just fine in her hands. Domino also comes with two alternate fists that are cast in a dark blue plastic. You can articulate these fists inwards as well as outwards. I would have expected the fists to pop on just fine, but here's the thing. The pegs on the swappable fists are actually much longer than the default trigger hands. So the fists do go into those holes on her arms, but they end up feeling really tight in there. And once you twist those hands, it feels like you're actually putting too much torque on those pegs and they might break. So what I'm gonna do is just grab a pair of clippers and cut them down to size. You can probably do this also with a hobby knife. And now those fists do pop on much better. They still fit snugly in there, but they don't feel like they're about to twist and break off. So now you have the option of having Domino without holding her weapons, just having fists, and Hasbro really should have taken care of the length of those pegs. For Domino's sculpt, her lower torso to her legs are all reused from the standard Marvel Legends slim female body, but looking at her upper torso, her arms as well as her head, they are all a sexy new sculpt. And that kind of makes me feel that Domino is the star of this 3-pack already. Onto her head sculpt, and it's mostly made from 3 parts. First of all, her face is cast in a white plastic, and then there's a metallic purple headpiece on the front, and her hair is cast in the black plastic that's attached on top. That headpiece does look smooshed coming out of the plastic tray. It's made of a soft and pliable plastic. This headpiece is actually glued to her forehead, but it's not actually glued to the side of her face. And once you have a closer look at the sculpt of her hair, you can see that there are actually groove lines for her headpiece to actually fit in there. And that's also the same on the left side of her hair sculpt. You can see how the groove over there is meant for her headpiece to go into. So releasing her headpiece, you can see it bounce back to the front of her face after being smooshed in the plastic tray. So what I'm gonna do is apply a small hit of super glue onto the groove on the side of her hair sculpt, and we'll see how that holds the headpiece. And this is what she looks like with the super glue applied to the sides of her hair in order to hold her headpiece in the right place. I think it looks much better to my eye than before, and now with that headpiece out of her face, we can actually have a better look at her face sculpt. She's sculpted gritting her teeth, looking determined and rushing into battle. I think the face sculpt is beautiful. I like how the paints, like the blacks, the bright reds for her lip, as well as the paint in her eyes, they're all sharply applied, and they all stand out really starkly against her white skin tone. So there's really fantastic work on the face. Looking at the sculpt of her hair, it's sculpted with textures just to show her straight hair coming all the way down. The hairstyle is likely a stylish bob, and you can see all the clearly defined strands going all the way down. No shading on the hair, but I think it actually catches the light pretty well in order to show off all the textures. So once you've done that small fix with that headpiece, this head sculpt is definitely iconic. Moving on to her torso, it does look a little bare. On the artwork on the back of the box, she actually has some straps or bandoliers on her torso. But on her torso, she doesn't have any of those accessories. The upper torso is a brand new sexy sculpt. She's got a nice high collar over here, as well as very sharply applied metallic purple paints for those 3 buttons. I like her asymmetric shoulder pads, also cast in a metallic looking purple plastic, and these shoulder pads are given that same gold standard shoulder pad treatment. They are actually keyed into the joint of her shoulder. So these shoulder pads will articulate with her arms as you swing them around, and will not get in the way of articulation. So that is really impressive work. I love how these shoulder pads have been executed in production. Moving on to her arms, they're also a brand new sculpt. This time they got a bicep swivel, and they've got pinless double jointed elbows over here. She's got armor plating sculpted on the sides of her arms. These armor plates are a metallic purple paint. The paints do match up well with the metallic plastic on her shoulder pads. On the back of her torso, there are no paint applications, it's just a plain blue plastic. Her belt piece is also cast in that metallic looking purple plastic, and the sculpt of her belt piece is reused from figures like Silver Sable as well as Lady Deadpool. Looking at the lower part of her body, it's also cast in a dark blue plastic, But this time it's also given really sharp paint applications for the whites on the inside of her legs as well as on her crotch. The paints are applied really sharp, and you can tell that the line actually matches all the way and is straight down her leg. So there's a really nice eye-catching detail that actually makes her lower body kind of stand out. I like how that paint is also sharply applied on her butt, and this design element is really eye-catching even from the back of the figure. On her right thigh, she's got a metallic purple plastic strap. This is a separate piece that just slides onto her thigh. So overall, that's really great sculpting work on Domino. You just need to fix that headpiece, and you have really nice cool sculpting, especially on the upper part of that figure. For articulation, she's also got a newly designed neck, and that's a double ball dumbbell joint at the top of her neck, as well as another ball joint at the bottom. And that means you can spin her head 360, getting really good sideways tilt from the two ball joints. You can also get her to look down pretty well as up quite a fair bit. Swivel hinge at the shoulders with the shoulder pads that move along with it, coming out that far on her arm. Upper bicep swivel so you can spin that arm 360. Double jointed pinless elbows that are pretty stiff, but you can get quite a good range out of it. Swivel hinge at the wrist that goes 360 as well as articulating in and out. On her right trigger hand, she also has a swivel hinge, but this time it articulates down as well as up. She's got a mid-torso ball joint, so you can spin her sideways as well as get her to do some sideways tilting. You can also bend her forward that much as well as backward. She's got a standard ball joints at the hips that go out not that far, and you can go forward and backward that much. There's a swivel at her thigh, so you can spin it outwards as well as inwards. Double jointed knees, so you can get quite a good range out of it. And over here, once again, looking at that knee joint, I realized that the clean, impressive paintwork is also applied on that knee joint. Really straight and really sharp. And it also withstands the friction in the joint, so that's really great work. And finally, on her to her ankles, she gets some tilt downwards as well as outwards, and ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. So here's a quick side-by-side with the previous Domino from the Sasquatch Build-A-Figure wave. She's definitely a good representation of a more modern-looking Domino. But I do like the new Domino much better because she's got a better head sculpt, the re-engineered upper part of her body, as well as a more eye-catching and nostalgic outfit and color palette. You should note that the two head sculpts are actually not swappable, but I'll probably be keeping both Dominos in my collection just to have her in her different looks. Domino is starting to feel like the star of the set to me because of her newly sculpted parts, as well as the really well executed paint work on her body. You do have to fix a couple of issues like her headpiece as well as her interchangeable fists, but once you do, she turns out quite the impressive action figure. And now we take a look at Cannonball's accessories. He comes with this plume of flames. This is sculpted in a more golden orange plastic, with the darker orange paint applications for the bottom. The paint application on the bottom has a shiny glossy finish, which actually throws me off just a little bit because flames aren't supposed to be shiny. I would much rather have all of this actually have a matte finish. The sculpting is pretty good, showing off all the rolls and twists in the flames, as well as some parts sticking out on the side, making it look like a pretty organic kind of fire. And once we get to the top of the plume, here they have a matte white paint that's applied. The fade is pretty good, and it shows you just how the smoke is kind of forming at the top of the flames. In terms of paintwork, I do notice that Hasbro has actually skipped out on some paint applications from the prototype. It's now missing those hits of black paint at the top. And that is quite disappointing because the black paint applications were reminiscent of the kind of effects shown in the artwork in the comics during the 90s. So I think that additional hit of black paint would have definitely made this look much better. Hasbro shouldn't have cheaped out on that paint application. I don't think it would have actually saved them that much money anyway. To use the plume, you simply just detach the top half of Cannonball and then pop him back right on top of the plume. And this was the state that Hasbro actually sold his previous figure. I skipped out on that one because I just wasn't happy that Hasbro didn't give him a complete bottom half of his body. But this is what he looks like with the plume on. Another criticism I have of this plume is that it just looks too small compared to his body. When Cannonball is blasting off, he's supposed to have the flames engulf the lower half of his body. And over here, the plume just appears too skinny. He doesn't look like he could realistically have that plume kind of enveloping his lower body. So now he just looks kind of strange, having a smaller plume relative to his larger upper body, kind of looking a little bit like a weird genie. Cannonball also comes with an alternate head that we'll take a look once we zoom into the head sculpt of the figure. Besides the alternate head and the plume of flames, I thought he could have used some flat hands, just like what we got on Rictor. These would have definitely helped him look much better soaring off and blasting off into battle. In terms of his sculpt, the base of the body is mostly from the Bucky Cap mold, and there's a lot of reuse from Shatterstar over here. You can see that in his sleeved arms and the gloves. And that means he also suffers from the same shortcomings on the Shatterstar arms. As you can see over here on Shatterstar, his arms are a more bulkier sculpt, so he's not able to actually rest his arms naturally by his side. On Cannonball, that's made even worse because he's got a jacket overlay on his torso, and that's keeping his arms even further out. So his arms just kind of hang out like that, kind of looking like a wrestler, and he cannot actually rest his arms by his side naturally. Zooming into his head sculpts, they both come with a cap as well as the blonde hair. I do appreciate that the cap as well as the blonde hair are actually different sculpts on both heads. The hair also has nice texturing on it, and the texture is also brought out by a brown wash. Coming back to look at his cap, both caps have also that texturing on it, and that texture makes the cap look realistically like leather. I like that effect, and it certainly looks good. Also having some subtle details like the covers on the side of his head for his ears. Coming back to the front of that head sculpt, each head also has its own unique pair of goggles. There's silver paint for the goggles. The alternate head is the same one that we've seen on the previous Cannonball figure. He's gritting his teeth, while the default head has a more neutral look on it. The paints are sharp on both heads, but it could get slightly messy around the eyes. And of course the alternate head sculpt also has an additional hit of white paint for his teeth. And of course the alternate head pops on just fine. And now coming to look at the rest of the sculpt and paint on his torso. There are different shades of purple over here, and that's a nice contrast. There's light grey paint applications over here for his collar, and coming out onto his jacket, it's also got the same nice texturing as we've seen on his cap. All the sculpted detail for the seams as well as the texture actually makes it look like leather, and there's also a hit of grey paint over here for the patchwork on his jacket. His gloves are cast in grey plastic, and that is a separate piece that's attached onto his purple arms. His arms also have sculpting to show the folds in the fabric. Coming to the back of the figure is just more of that good sculpting just to show the wrinkles in that leather of his jacket. And now we move to the front of his lower half of his body. Nice interesting sculpted detail over here for his belt. His crotch piece as well as his legs are cast in the white plastic. And then there's that same dull purple paint applied on the sides of his legs. The paint is neatly applied and the lines are straight and clean all the way down his legs. Coming onto his boots, they are cast in the grey plastic with white paint applications for the straps on the front of his shins. And we go round to the back of his legs, and those lines are also clean, straight and sharp down the back of his legs as well. Moving on to articulation, his head is on a ball hinge, so you get to spin his head 360. You get also some sideways tilt. He can look down that much, as well as up pretty well, and that definitely helps in flight poses. Swivel hinge at the shoulders, so you can get his arms to go 360 as well as come out pretty far. Swivel at the bicep, so you can spin it 360 as well. Double hinge at the elbows, so you can get them to bend beyond 90 degrees. Swivel hinge at the wrist as well, so you can spin his wrist 360 as well as articulate in and out. He's got a mid-torso ab crunch, so he can go forward that much, as well as backward, and that's just only slightly hindered by that bomber jacket. Of course, he's got a swivel at his waist, ball-jointed hips that go out quite far, as well as forward and backward. Upper thigh swivel for 360 spin, double-jointed knees, pretty good range, swivel just above the boot for spinning his calf, ankle tilt upwards, as well as downwards, and finally ankle pivot outwards, as well as inwards. Articulation is pretty much Marvel Legends standard on Cannonball. I just wish that his arms were designed better so that he could let them rest more naturally along the side of his body. I will say though that Cannonball feels like the weakest action figure in this 3-pack. I definitely rate Rictor and Domino much better than him. In terms of size, Rictor stands tallest at 6.5 inches, and that's about 16.5 centimeters. Domino comes in at 6.25 inches, and that's just under 16 centimeters. And Cannonball comes in at 6 3/8 of an inch, and that's just over 16 centimeters. For size comparisons, here they are with Cable, Deadpool, and Deathlock. Some more of their X-Force teammates with Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Wolverine. Here they are with X-Factor, and here they are with some modern X-Force members. Here they are with some G.I. Joe Classified series, and some Star Wars Black series. This box set is pretty neat. Cannonball is the weakest of the lot, but he had to be done right with a proper lower body. Rictor is a very unique addition to the growing X-Force, and a very worthy first-time 6-inch representation. And lastly, Domino is the star in her classic outfit and re-engineered upper body. Once you get past the minor downsides, this box set is essential for 90s X-Force fans, and you will definitely enjoy this as much as I did. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more toy reviews. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.